You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 51 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, as he always is, our other host, the guy that runs our Twitter page, and a very fine gentleman at that, my good brother, Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 51 of the DCAU Review.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're finishing up our Elseworlds Batman month here as we continue to celebrate the 80th anniversary of The Dark Knight with yet another alternate version of Bruce Wayne, another TV series. This one, the most recent Batman animated series. This one, 3D animated, in fact. Beware the Batman.
Yeah, it's definitely a different spin on things, and it's weird that this is the most recent of to think like this is the most recent of the iterations of Batman. It's been that long since we've had a new interpretation of Batman on the air, but you're right. This is completely different than what we're used to in our 2D drawing animation. Even the digital animation later of the Justice League interpretations of Batman. Liam, this is basically if Pixar had the rights to Batman and decided they were going to do a animated series, this may be what it would look like.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe it. It's a lot of big barrel-chested men and a lot of very strong jaw lines and. The creature, some of the villains are very colorful, literal and figuratively. But I like the world. I think it's certainly it does a pretty good job, I think, of setting itself up right from the get-go as its own animal.
Absolutely. So this just a little background. This series debuted on July 13th, 2013 on Cartoon Network. It following up, replacing Batman Brave and the Bold, which we've covered a couple episodes of. It sort of started out controversial from the get-go. I remember towards I think the beginning of 2012, maybe they released some artwork for this announcing that it was going to be coming out, and there was some uproar immediately because there was a shot on the initial artwork of Alfred, and Alfred is carrying two guns standing alongside Batman. Yeah. And I remember there being some controversy about that. Of course, people were upset that Batman's number one thing is he doesn't use guns. So why would he be standing alongside Alfred, who is also supposed to be on his side regardless? And it's I don't know. Like it started out controversial from the get-go. Any thoughts on Alfred carrying guns in the promo work?
Well, I mean, yeah, that was described. The series was developed and created by a couple of DCAU veterans, Glenn Murakami, who of course also was the head producer on the Teen Titans show.
Definitely.
And also Butch Lukic, who was a long-term storyboard artist and director for several different DCAU projects. So, and I remember reading an interview with Glenn Murakami at the time, basically saying, well, I wanted to do promo art that featured Alfred because he's a prominent character, and not that I didn't, basically he said something along the lines of, I didn't know what else to do with Alfred. He couldn't be holding like a tray in the promo art. He had to be doing something sort of heroic and, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they could have just had him putting up his dukes or something. But it was certainly. I do remember people being a bit concerned about that. I think just maybe concerned about the idea of Alfred being like an active crime fighter, which, as we get into the show, that's really not what his role is, at least in this first episode. But he is a much more of a physical presence in this series than he has been in any other interpretation of Batman we've watched up until now.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because, going out further from this, I think the most recent non-movie and non-cartoon versions of Batman, the live-action show Gotham, which I think I probably watched the first 4 seasons or so. Their interpretation of Alfred was much along the same lines of the former secret agent that worked in was it M6 or
MI6, yeah.
MI6. And ironically, I saw a new trailer for the new Pennyworth series that DC is working on or debuting soon, which actually follows a very similar storyline of Alfred being a former secret agent in his time as a secret agent. So I think that they just more or less were reinventing the character. We've seen the Alfred of being Batman's loyal butler that brings in the sandwiches. Of course, hashtag our Alfred, as Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. is the confidant and certainly the sometimes comic relief in character in Batman the Animated Series. But yeah. I don't blame the creators of the show wanting to go in a different direction with the Alfred character and try something new. Him holding, like Murakami said, him holding a tray in the promo art probably wouldn't have been very exciting. But interestingly enough, and we'll get into our scores here in just a moment, but this show only lasted 1 season on Cartoon Network. It was kind of a weird thing that happened. They debuted most of the episodes on Cartoon Network, and then suddenly it just kind of disappeared. And then there wasn't really an announcement of what happened. And then they sort of just kind of blew out the final 7 episodes kind of unannounced. And speculation was that it was kind of a financial failure. It was a lot of 3D animation. There was stuff that, because of the way they sort of filmed the series, it made it expensive to do, which is a little bit sad because it's been since 2013, obviously now since we've had a Batman cartoon on the air.
Yeah.
So overall thoughts of this, and then we'll jump right into our plots. It's exciting because you always want to see Batman on the screen, Liam, but yeah. I totally understand why, if this wasn't a financial success, it didn't. The first episode overall didn't grab me and say, "Man, I want to see 20 more episodes of this."
I think that's fair. You probably could have done. There isn't a lot of action, quite frankly, in this episode, at least in a traditional sense. You get a little bit of Batman fighting some thugs at the beginning. And you get a little car chase, and then at the end you sort of have Batman come in to save the day. But there isn't a lot of action, and so yeah, if it didn't, I can understand you saying, or anyone watching saying, that it maybe didn't grab them right away. Especially because, unfortunately, even though this was very much trying to be its own thing, I think when you have to, if you're doing a animated Batman series, it's always going to be compared to everything that's come before it. So doing that sort of non-traditional approach to the storytelling itself, using some villains that really haven't been ever used, or certainly haven't been used prominently in anything outside of some comics. Professor Pig is sort of the big villain of this episode, along with his assistant, Mr. Toad, and I know the villain Magpie is pretty heavily featured later on in the series. So it's kind of one of those things where you're a little damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think they tried to stay away from the Jokers and the Penguins, and tried to maybe put the spotlight on some newer characters or some different characters. And but you're right, when you do that, you also run the risk of maybe losing people before they even really get a feel for what the show is.
Yeah, I would agree with you. General thoughts on choosing to go that route of not, we watched the first episode of The Batman a couple weeks ago, and they elected to go first episode Joker. This is the very first episode, and from what I can tell, based on, obviously I've only watched 1 episode of this, but from reading a summary, they never really get into Joker. Never shows up on the show. You never have a Penguin appearance, Riddler, sort of your top tier, they do eventually introduce Ra's al Ghul and Killer Croc, but the rest of the cast, as you said, Magpie, Anarchy, Phosphorus Rex, Lady Shiva, Humpty Dumpty, guys that have not been used in prominently, or are not the first Batman villains that you think of when it comes to Batman's rogues.
Yeah, again, it's tough because I like the idea of trying it, and I think specifically Professor Pig is like one of the more interesting characters that's been created in Batman comics in the last 15 or 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was created during Grant Morrison's run at the end of the 2000s, or the 01 to 09s. What do you call those? The aughts?
The aughts, yeah.
The aughts, during the Batman RIP run. I really like that character. We don't really see him in the same exact traditional way that he's been portrayed in the comics, but so I like the idea of getting to see things we haven't seen before. So for me, it worked, and because I've watched every other interpretation of Batman and animation, several times. So this, to me personally, it felt like a breath of fresh air. But like I said, I can understand why someone else who maybe isn't as well versed in Batman, but sort of knows the basics, if they turn on this show and see him fighting a guy in a pig mask and some frog that can has a sonic cry, maybe that doesn't grab you the same way that the clown does.
Sure. That makes I think that's fair. All right, let's jump into our scores then. So as we always do, we have our 4 different scores. We'll start with our plot, Liam. Plot, basically, we're not given much background, unlike the Batman. We can kind of figure out that this is fairly early on in Batman's career, based on some of his interactions with Alfred and Alfred's deep concern over protecting Batman. Again, Alfred is positioned more as Bruce's bodyguard / butler, as opposed to just his, the guy that makes me sandwiches, as Dick Grayson says in the DCAU. So the plot is that someone is targeting some of Gotham's wealthiest businessmen, one of whom happens to be Simon Stagg, who is also an interesting first episode appearance here. Him, of course, of Stagg Industry fame, who plays a somewhat prominent role in the Justice League DCAU series. Also Michael Holt, who some of us may know as the alter ego for Mr. Terrific, is also hunted, and turns out, like you said, to be Professor Pig and Mr. Toad, these two characters with heavy British accents, and who are targeting them to take revenge. And then they turn towards Bruce Wayne. They turn their eyes on Bruce Wayne and end up capturing Alfred in the meantime. Then Batman has to save Alfred, Simon Stagg, and the artist formerly known as Mr. Terrific from the villains. There's some car chases, and Batman saves them in the end. At the very end, Alfred does introduce Bruce's new protector, who I assume they're setting up for down the road in the series. Is his goddaughter, who turns out to be Katana.
Yeah.
What do you think of the plot?
I liked it overall. Like I said, even acknowledging that it's sort of a non-traditional way to start off a series. They keep everything pretty simple, but you get from the first time we meet Batman, he's sort of in the shadows and he's fighting off these two thugs, but he's a little careless and he gets beat up. We almost immediately cut to Alfred attacking him in his bed in Wayne Manor, sort of trying to make sure he's ready for everything. As you mentioned, sort of that role that he's taken on in Gotham, or if you've ever read Jeff Johns' Batman Earth 1 book, it's a similar sort of thing where Alfred is not just, as you mentioned, not just the butler, is also sort of training Bruce and then trying to make sure that he's as ready as anyone else can be, as ready as he can be to go out and face all these monsters and murderers. And you intercut that with the Professor Pig and Mr. Toad, who are basically upset that uh, this marshlands were bought out by this conglomerate of these three different companies, and then I guess literally drained the swamp, and then didn't do anything with the area and sort of let it just go to hell, and a lot of animals lost their habitat. So it's almost a little bit of a poison ivy type, and they're almost sort of like the eco-terrorist villains. They're sort of taking that tact with it.
Yeah. I think that as far as introducing people to a brand new world, like you said, characters you may not be familiar with. And I think introducing you to, okay, how is this Batman? This is the fifth Batman, not counting like Super Friends and all that. Like, this is the fifth Batman interpretation that we'll be going through here. So let's, what does this look like? How is this different? And what do I have to know about this guy? And doing so, but not also dragging that out and making it feel like a burden to have to learn about Batman and taking it and treating your audience like they're stupid. So I think they did a good enough job in differentiating themselves from other interpretations of Batman. I think the plot is fine. With these characters, I wasn't offended by anything. I didn't think it's hard because it's the debut, it's the pilot episode of a program. So we talked about this when we did the On Leather Wings, and, you're introducing people to this brand new world and getting them to feel comfortable, but also not overwhelming them. And, these are not characters. This interpretations of these characters are not ones that we're necessarily familiar with, or comfortable with yet. So, for all those reasons, I gave plot a 6 out of 10. I think it's good. It's solid. I think I could have used a little more Batman hand-to-hand combat. I think there was a little bit lacking in that. I think that very first scene, actually, where he's taking on the bank robbers, or the guys that was a great setup. I thought it was done really well. It was straight out of like a Batman movie. I would have enjoyed more of that in the episode, but there wasn't much hand-to-hand combat with Professor Pig and Mr. Toad.
Yeah, I'm right in that same ballpark. I liked it a little bit more. I gave it 7 out of 10.
Okay.
I liked the basic nature of Alfred sort of telling him at the beginning, hey, you need to let me help you. You need to let other people in. And Bruce kind of doesn't want to. And then by the end, we learn a lesson, because Bruce points out that if he had sort of dug a little deeper, if he had done a little more detective work, he would have known that Bruce Wayne's name was attached to this project, and he could have probably better prepared and obviously avoided Alfred getting captured. So, and then at the end, obviously, as you said, they introduced the future Katana into the show, and as his new bodyguard. So it's sort of the beginnings of Batman going from sort of the loner vigilante to to sort of building his own little makeshift family there. I liked it. I thought it was very solid for what it was.
Quick thoughts on introducing Batman, a bodyguard for Batman, and that bodyguard being Katana, as opposed to Batman having a protege like a Robin.
Yeah, it just feels like they wanted to try to tell a story that hasn't been told yet. I know they later on in the series introduced Barbara Gordon as Oracle, and just to me it felt like they for whatever reason didn't want to do a Robin right away, and I guess they wanted the partner to be more of an equal and more of someone that's prepared for anything, rather than, as you mentioned, a protege or a student for Batman to teach. So, again, it's unorthodox, but I don't dislike it.
That's fair. I take that. All right, let's move on to our animation, Liam. So I kind of went back and forth on this a little bit. I'm not a fan of the Batman design. Something weird about his eyes. I don't know what's up with them. It would feel like they're upside down. Like they took the normal Batman eyes and they flipped them upside down or something like that. And his costume appears to be all black or something. It's hard to tell. Like the promo art looks like it may be a little gray, but it also kind of looks like an all black suit, which
it's a little reminiscent of the Chris Nolan, Christian Bale suit.
Which to me, not the biggest fan of if you're going to model a suit after any of the Batman suits. Not the biggest fan of the Nolan Batman suits, but to each their own. With that said, though, I think we mentioned one of the reasons why this was canceled was because of the expense that they had to go through in each episode, which I'd be interested in watching a few episodes after this to see if it continued that way. But it is really done really well visually as far as camera angles and the way that things look. It's presented in a way that appears to be very cinematic. Reminds me of a way that a movie is shot. One of the scenes, that opening scene that I talked about, Batman, where Batman is stopping the robbers. First of all, I love the beginning where it pans down from the top of the building. It harkens back to the Batman the Animated Series intro, where the robbers are outside the building and there's an explosion. But that interaction there is filmed so incredibly well. The cuts back and forth between, the faces of Batman, the face of the villain, and then back behind the villain's back where he's taunting him, done really, really well. I think cinematically it looks very well. The characters out of their costume, it's a little bit, like I said, Pixar, like The Incredibles, or, if you saw any of the Green Lantern, the animated series that they did around this time, very similar animation to that. So it takes some getting used to, I think. But I liked it overall. I gave animation a 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I'm a little strong with that. I went 9 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
I really enjoyed it for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. Just the visuals of it is, a lot of this, especially if you mention that opening scene where Batman's mostly in shadow, and then as the thug fires the gun, he sort of, it illuminates it, and you see Batman in all his glory, and just the way everybody moves, I think, is really interesting. I liked the vehicles. I liked the way the Batmobile looked. I liked the Professor Pig's and Mr. Toad's little car that they're driving around in. I thought a lot of cool. The design work they did in the series is really tremendous, and as you mentioned, the animation and just the way it was shot and some of the different camera tricks they use, it's really well done. You can tell this is real high level stuff as far as 3D animation for a TV series goes. I thought it was really good. I like the look of Batman for the most part. I like it's an age old debate. How long should Batman's ears be? Some people are Jim Lee guys. Some people are Kelly Johnson guys, and there's a few in between, or Kelly Jones. And there's a few different options in between. But I like the long bat ears on this suit, and I like the general look of it, and I really enjoyed this visually. I thought the part at the end when they're sort of escaping from the compound and all these different explosions going off, and Batman sort of running and doing a little bit of parkour as he's jumping out of the burning building, I thought was really well done. And glides out of the building, crashes through a window as it's all exploding behind him, was really, really well done. And I definitely can believe that this had probably about as big a budget as any superhero cartoon ever has.
Yeah, like when I read that the reason why it was canceled was due to expensive production, it kind of made sense. Neat little fact here: this episode was actually directed by a guy named Sam Liu, who is another sort of DC animation veteran.
Oh, yes.
Directed Justice League Gods and Monsters and Justice League versus the Teen Titans, Killing Joke, Judas Contract,
Fatal 5.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Batman, Harley Quinn. There you go. He's done a lot of good stuff. So it fits that, the guys that have been doing this for a long time want to make it visually interesting and not just a static, your characters are moving on a flat piece of, even though this is 3D, like you're a flat screen, like your characters are just moving around. It's designed to look cinematically interesting, I think. So, yeah, I think that I don't disagree with a high score for this one. So that's good. All right, William, let's move to music now. Before we went on the air, I asked you, did this episode have music in it? And then we commented. So there is an original theme song that you heard on the intro coming in here that is done by a group named the Dum Dum Girls. Yes. Apparently they are an indie rock band. And they did the Batman theme.
I like it.
Yeah, it's different. I don't know that it fits the tone. Like I don't know. I felt like it was a little bit too light of a song based on the dark. Like this show seems to be a little bit darker. There wasn't as much humor in it, and especially like visually, it's dark also. So I thought it was interesting that this theme. I don't. Again, this is the only episode of this that I've seen, so I don't know what the tone is throughout the rest of it. If it lightens up at all. Not a lot of jokes to be had. Not a lot of I don't know. So the tone didn't necessarily match the show to me, but I liked the song. Other than that, what did you think of the music for this episode?
Yeah, well, as you've mentioned, there wasn't a lot to it. Not that there wasn't any music. It was just sort of felt like your sort of average sort of placeholder. When tension's building, there's some strings and sort of some background, sort of creepy or dramatic. Some sort of dramatic horn would play or something when the villains first come on screen. But yeah, there's an absence of a particular theme when you think of Shirley Walker's Superman theme or the Batman Beyond theme or something like that plays, or even that familiar like fight scene music that you might hear in a Batman Beyond episode or something isn't really there. There's a sort of a triumphant moment when Batman finally enters the scene as Professor Pig and Mr. Toad are about to attack Alfred and the two billionaires. But other than that, it's kind of a non-factor. So I mean, I gave music 4 out of 10 just because, not that the music there is bad, but I thought if there was a bit more of a pronounced theme when Batman first enters the fray, or something really sort of over the top and wacky when you see Mr. Toad for the first time or something, then that could have maybe added a lot to the atmosphere of it.
Yeah, I actually had the same exact score of 4 out of 10. Imagine that. I think that when you're coming off of, it's so hard. It's so hard, as we've already mentioned in this. You have 3 or 4 other Batman interpretations that you're comparing this to. It's its own thing, so it's hard to kind of let it stand on its own. So you want to, but at the same time, the things that we've talked about that have made Batman the Animated Series so iconic wasn't just the fact that it was written so well, wasn't the fact that the voice performances were so great. It was the music is a huge part of that, as we've discussed in a lot of our 50 previous episodes. Is music plays a huge role. Music matters in those episodes, and a lot of times that can take a mediocre episode and make it great, or can make a great episode or a decent episode and take it down a notch or two. So now that this was composed, the music is it's by a German composer, Frederick Wiedmann, who has done a bunch of other DC animated films and stuff. So and he also did Green Lantern the animated series apparently. So I guess what the sound that they were going for is something more background, something more that isn't necessarily focused on that, and isn't meant to draw attention, I guess, per se. But I think you're right. I think it's hard not to compare this to other interpretations, and even whether it's Beware the Batman, whether it's Brave and the Bold or The Batman, music plays an important role in those other two series. So when you look at this in a vacuum, sure, it's just one episode, but for this one episode, I thought, it could have used something. Also, it's really, really, really difficult when you don't have a standard Batman theme, Batman has his own theme. So it would be interesting to figure out if they establish something as more of a Batman theme later on in the episodes. All right, Liam, we'll move on to our final category of the day, which is voice acting. We have a couple of well-known voices in this week's episode and a couple of newcomers. Who do we have of note to talk about today?
So, first and foremost, you have Anthony Revivar as Batman. He's known for a few different roles. I believe he's in Starship Troopers. And
it's a cult classic.
And a few other movies like that. So he's pretty. I think he does an all right job. I don't think he's not my favorite Batman of the four that we've looked at this month. He might be number 4 on that list for me.
Yeah, he reminded me a lot of the Telltale game Batman. If you've played plenty of that, I actually liked and got used to the Telltale Batman voice. I actually think he probably did a little bit better of a job than this performance did, but it was the same, in a similar vein. It was just kind of, I don't know, just it lacked a little bit of punch. It wasn't awful, but it's just missing something, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And even with something like the Batman, the dichotomy between Bruce and Alfred was such a big part of that series, and coming to this, and that's, again, as we mentioned, plot is such a big part of this episode, is sort of Alfred telling Bruce, you need to let me help you, you need to let people in, and they're back and forth. I think as we'll get to in a second, the voice actor who plays Alfred is good in his role, but yeah, it's just a little something to be desired from Mr. Revivar's performance as Batman. But again, as you mentioned, it's just the first episode. I'm sure he had some time to hopefully grow into the role and give better performances as the series went on.
Sure.
But we also have, as the aforementioned Alfred, we have J.B. Blanc, who, among other things, was on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I assume playing the same character.
Oh, interesting.
Played a doctor, I believe, on that series, and played a lot of other television series guest star work. So I really enjoy him as Alfred, especially this sort of version, the rough and tough version of Alfred. I think he's really good.
Yeah, it's certainly a different voice. We've talked a lot about Alfred voices on this show, but I think it lines up. It's this interpretation of Alfred needs to, like you said, be more tough, less refined. They did the same thing in the Gotham TV series, as they made it's more of a Cockney accent than a smooth, educated sounding British accent. So I think you're right, spot on with that.
And then sort of some of the other cast members, we have Brian George as Professor Pig, and Udo Kier as Mr. Toad. I thought they do a pretty good job. Again, they're kind of just they just sort of have this kind of quirky back and forth dialogue of like being very polite. They're very polite as they're threatening to murder people and attacking Batman and the other characters here. I enjoyed it. Maybe not the most memorable villain performances we've heard, certainly, but I thought they did well for what their role was.
Yeah, I think they're fine. I think it's better for them that these characters have not been used before. And so you really don't have anything to compare them. If it was a Joker, if it was a Penguin, you don't really have anything to compare Professor Pig's voice performance to,
Right.
except maybe the Arkham games, and that doesn't really stand out as anything memorable from my recollection.
Yeah, and I believe he since then has been used in one of the DC animated movies, but yeah,
Okay.
definitely not as you mentioned, a super well known character or super overused character the way someone like a Penguin or a Joker is. But and then sort of rounding out the cast, you have Gary Anthony Williams as Michael Holt, who was uh, on one of my favorite TV series, Boston Legal.
Oh yeah, classic.
Played a cross-dressing lawyer on that series, and then was also in the second live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, where he played either Bebop or Rocksteady. I'm not good with Ninja Turtle stuff. I just saw that movie that Stephen Amell was in it.
Okay, I gotcha.
But yeah, I thought I enjoyed him in his limited role as Michael Holt, and then we have famous voice actor. We just talked about him somewhat recently, but Jeff Bennett as Simon Stagg, who, of course, was Johnny Bravo. And within the world of DCAU, you pointed out to me that we've heard his voice talents in a few DCAU projects before.
Yes, right. He is the voice of the Disagreement Alarm, also known as Hardak. And he plays Joker in Batman the Brave and the Bold. And he also did several voices on The Batman, including Killer Moth and DAVE, also known as Dave, the supercomputer.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a forgotten episode that I had blocked from my memory, apparently, or never saw of The Batman, that you told me had quite the interesting plot that we'll have to cover at another time. But yeah, he's definitely a DC animated voice actor veteran.
Yeah, I thought overall, I think the voice acting is, again, I think it's not perfect, it's not super great, but I think really the standout to me is JB Blanc as Alfred. I gave voice acting 7 out of 10. I liked it. Just didn't like I said, I thought it was solid to good.
Yeah, I gave it also 6 out of 10. So right there with you. One voice we forgot to mention also was Kurtwood Smith, who plays, of course, Red Foreman, also was in, from that 70s show, was also in the RoboCop movies. We also just talked about him recently. He played the prosecutor in Blackest Night, on Justice League, the Justice League episode. So it's good. He plays Commissioner Gordon, or Lieutenant James Gordon, rather. In this episode, be interested to see how much he was used in later episodes, but that was interesting to hear him as Jim Gordon, somebody different. Yeah, I think the voice acting is good. I'm sure it's something that the characters, the more that you invest in it, the more you get used to hearing the characters, and be interested in hearing more performances. I think you are spot on as far as Alfred's performance is really good. The last scene where he kind of has this emotional breakdown with Bruce and explains to him that he's not going to be able to be there to protect him forever, but because he made this promise after Bruce's parents died, that he was going to do whatever it took to protect Bruce. That whole scene there is done really, really well, and the voice performance I thought was excellent. I think it's solid. I think there's room for improvement, certainly, in when it comes to Batman. We'd be interested to see how his performance grows through this series. But yeah, 6 out of 10 for mine. All right, Liam, I think that will bring us to our final scores.
Yes, it will.
Which, totaling up my scores, which I didn't do before. Let's see here.
My final score as a total is 27 out of 40.
Wow, that is high. That is higher than I thought it was going to be. Mine is 23 out of 40, so a little bit lower. But as far as rewatchability, Liam, this is something that we've been starting to grade a lot of our shows on. What would you give this as far as rewatchability is concerned?
I think this is probably, it's tough for me because this is the only episode of the series I've ever saw, so I can't compare it to other episodes of the series. But I think if you're curious, if you just want a different take on Batman, certainly if you're listening to this podcast and you're so uber familiar with the Kevin Conroy iteration, and you just want to see something that's really completely different, its own animal, I think it's worth giving it a shot. And just it's the standard 22 minutes. It's not a big ask of your time. Give it a watch and see if it grabs you. So I'd give this one thumb up as far as rewatchability goes.
One thumb up.
I would give it one sonic scream from a
froggy sonic scream.
Yes, from a frog-like Toad character. I'd say give it a whirl. I mean, it piqued my interest enough for me to say, okay, I'd be interested in watching another episode or two of this. It's not exactly easy to find. Hopefully the DC Universe, which, by the way, subscribe to it if you can. Remember, DC Universe does not pay to advertise on this program, Liam.
That's true, but they could.
They could
pay
us
your money, just in case.
We would. Or just like a free subscription for life to the DC Universe or something, whatever it takes. But it would be cool to see them add this on to, and I'm sure eventually they will add this on to the DC Universe as they add more content on there. And then who knows, maybe it'll gain some more traction and, gain some, maybe a cult following, like some of the other classic Batman stuff has that wasn't necessarily appreciated when it debuted.
Yeah, and I'll say if you're just a fan of all of these different creators and producers and directors and storyboard artists that a lot of them did get their start on Batman the Animated Series and or Superman or Justice League, and obviously James Tucker went on to do the Brave and the Bold series and Legion of Superheroes, and then you have Glenn Murakami did Teen Titans, and as well as this series, and obviously Butch Lukic was involved as well. So if you're interested in just sort of seeing, if you're a fan of individual producers or creators within that have worked on DCAU projects and kind of want to see them stretch their legs and see what they would do with these characters or their versions, their interpretations, I think this show or Brave and the Bold, as we're sort of wrapping up our Elseworlds Batman month here, I think it's good every once in a while to just poke your head out of the DCAU waters and just take a look at what some of these other brilliant creators, their versions, their interpretations of these great iconic characters.
Could not have put it better myself. Yeah, get outside your box. But Liam, that's a tremendous segue, by the way, as this does put a bow on the end of our Elseworlds month, which means it's time to talk about where we're headed starting next month, Liam. So we're excited to announce that. Where are we headed next month, Liam?
So for the month of May, we will be continuing this hashtag Batman 80 party as we are returning to home base, the Batman the Animated Series. We're going to be finishing up season 1, the season 1 DVDs of Batman the Animated Series, starting next week with the episode Appointment in Crime Alley. So we're jumping right in. We had to take some time off, you see, because if longtime listeners will remember the last episode of BTAS that we reviewed was the lowest rated episode of any of the shows that we have watched in all 51 episodes so far.
Somehow, and the answer was it was not the Underdwellers. Dollar in the Underdweller jar. No, it was not. It wasn't
Brave New Metropolis. It wasn't the Underdwellers.
It was freaking Fear of Victory, man. That thing just put such a bad taste in our mouth. We had to take a 3-month hiatus from Batman the Animated Series. We weren't sure if it was actually any good. We had us doubting if we'd been wrong this whole time.
Yes,
but we're excited to get back to where we started, back to Batman the Animated Series. as we work through the final episodes of season 1. And then Liam will start talking about where we're headed. We're headed in a new direction the following month as we head towards the summer. But I'm excited to get back to where it all began, get back to some classic Kevin Conroy and Bruce Timm
I
and Paul
would
Dini
go
drawings.
so far as to say that this is the most important and exciting superhero-related thing that is happening this weekend, the last weekend of April, is us announcing that we're going back to Batman the Animated Series next week. I mean, I can't think of anything else that's going on.
Nothing else will touch this. I anticipate multiple media coverage of this announcement. It's just going worldwide, no doubt.
Yeah, don't spoil our scores.
That's right.
Let everybody experience it for the first time. Unspoiled.
Come up with a hashtag for that. We appreciate it. All right, let's wrap things up here. Thank you all for listening. As we always say, thank you, and we appreciate any feedback that you give us. Tweet us. Liam runs our Twitter page, does a great job of being the DCAU review Twitter guru, as I've dubbed him. Constantly over there talking with fans, talking with other people that love the DCAU. So go talk to him. Have any thoughts about Beware the Batman, please share them with us. Maybe you're one of those people that was kind of taken aback and not a fan of this, or maybe you're one of the people that loved it and were kind of disappointed that it didn't get a fair shake. Tweet us at DCAU Review. Liam, any thoughts before we go?
No, I think, like you said, definitely want to hear some thoughts on this. And maybe if we were to do a second Elseworlds month going forward, I might do some Twitter polls and try to figure out another character, or if we spend an entire month with maybe one of the 3 shows that we've reviewed this month, the Batman, Brave and the Bold, or Beware the Batman, which one would you guys like to hear more about? So I'll definitely be doing some Twitter polls and asking some questions of you, our Twitter followers, soon. So definitely look out for that. Absolutely.
All right. So I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Goodbye.